Yes, you are conscious. Right now, you are experiencing these words. You have thoughts, feelings, a sense of self. There is a movie playing in your head, and you are the star, the director, and the audience all at once. This inner world is the most real thing you know. But what is it, and how does it happen? This isn't a small question. It might be the biggest question there is. And it leads us to what the philosopher David Chalmers called the hard problem of consciousness. To understand the hard problem, we first have to understand what he called the easy problems. Now, these easy problems are not actually easy at all. They are incredibly complex puzzles that occupy the life's work of thousands of neuroscientists, psychologists, and engineers. But they are easy in a specific sense. They are problems about function and mechanism. The easy problems are about how the brain works. How does it take in information from your eyes and ears? How does it process that information? How do you focus your attention on one thing and ignore another? How do you reach into your memory and pull out the name of your first grade teacher? How do you control your body to walk, talk, or type? These are all questions about how the brain behaves and processes information. We can study them, we can put people in brain scanners and see which parts light up when they solve a math problem. We can map the neural pathways that carry signals from the retina to the visual cortex. We can build computer models that simulate how neurons learn. We can, in theory, build a robot that can see, hear, remember, and react to its environment. We might not have all the answers yet, but we have a clear path. The path is science. We observe, we measure, we build models, we test them. The easy problems are about explaining what the brain does. But then there's the hard problem. The hard problem is this. Why does all that processing feel like anything at all? Why is there an inner experience? Why is there what it's like to be you? When light of a certain wavelength hits your retina and your brain processes it, why do you have the subjective, private, ineffable experience of seeing the color red? Why isn't it all just dark inside? Why aren't we just incredibly sophisticated robots processing information and reacting to the world without any inner life, any feeling, any awareness at all? This is the jump from the objective to the subjective, and it is a chasm. The easy problems are about the third-person world of observable data. We can both look at a brain scan, we can both agree on the firing rate of a neuron, but the hard problem is about the first-person world of private experience. I can never know what it is like to be you. I can never experience your experience of red. I can only assume it's similar to mine. Your consciousness is fundamentally private. My consciousness is fundamentally private. There is no way for me to open up your head and see your sadness. I can see the chemical reactions in your brain associated with sadness. I can see your tears, but I can't see the feeling itself. That feeling, that raw, subjective quality of an experience is what philosophers call qualia. The redness of red, the taste of a strawberry, the pain of a headache, the feeling of love. These are qualia. The hard problem is the problem of explaining how and why qualia exist. How does a lump of gray, wet matter in our skulls, a collection of cells and electrical signals, generate the rich tapestry of subjective experience? To really get a grip on this, philosophers use thought experiments. They are little stories designed to isolate the core of the problem. One of the most famous is about what it's like to be a bat. The philosopher Thomas Nagel asked this question. Bats navigate the world using echolocation. They send out high-pitched squeaks and use the echoes to build a mental map of their surroundings. We can understand everything about how this works. We can study the bat's vocal cords, its ears, its brain. We can know the physics of sound waves and the neuroscience of a bat's brain down to the last synapse. We can know every single objective, physical fact about a bat's echolocation. But do we know what it's like for the bat to experience the world through sound? Does it feel like a kind of seeing? Is it a pressure in its head? Is it something we can't even imagine? There is some subjective character, some what it's like ness to being a bat, but no matter how much objective scientific data we collect, we can never cross the bridge into its first-person experience. The science explains what the bat's brain does. It cannot explain what the bat feels. Another famous thought experiment is Mary's room. Imagine Mary is a brilliant neuroscientist who has lived her entire life in a black and white room. She has never seen color, but she has learned everything there is to know about the physics and biology of color vision. She knows exactly what happens in the brain when someone sees a red tomato. She knows the wavelengths of light, the cone cells in the retina, the neural pathways, everything. She is the world's leading expert on the science of color. One day, the door opens, and Mary walks out into the world. She sees a red tomato for the first time. The question is, does she learn anything new? The argument is that she does. She learns what it is like to see red. She learns the quale of red. Before, she had all the physical, objective information. Now, she has a new piece of information, the subjective experience itself. If she learns something new, then that subjective experience, that quale, cannot be fully captured by the physical facts alone. It must be something extra. And if it's something extra, then our purely physical, scientific story of the world is missing something. This leads to the most unsettling thought experiment of all, the philosophical zombie. A philosophical zombie is not a Hollywood zombie. It is a perfect physical duplicate of a human being. It looks, acts, talks, and behaves in every single way just like a conscious person. Well, if you prick it, it will say ouch and pull its hand away. It can write poetry, have conversations, and laugh at jokes. From the outside, it is completely indistinguishable from a normal person, but there is one difference. On the inside, there is nothing. It is all dark. There is no experience, no awareness, no qualia. The lights are on, but nobody's home. It is just a machine, a complex automaton running a program. The question is such a being even possible? If you think a philosophical zombie is possible, even in principle, then you are saying that consciousness is something extra, something over and above all the physical facts and behaviors. You are saying that all the physical stuff in the universe arranged just so does not automatically equal consciousness. Something else is needed. But if you think a philosophical zombie is impossible, then you have to explain why. You have to argue that a system that is physically and functionally identical to a conscious human must, by necessity, be conscious. You have to show how the physical stuff itself guarantees the inner experience, and that is the hard problem. We don't know how to do that. So why is this problem so hard? Our usual tools seem to fail us. Science is a powerful method for understanding the objective world. It works by breaking things down, measuring them, and finding the mechanisms. We broke down matter into atoms. We broke down life into cells and DNA. But consciousness doesn't seem to be like that. It doesn't seem to be made of smaller parts. My experience of seeing the whole blue sky doesn't feel like it's built from tiny separate blue pixels of experience. It is unified, and as we've seen, it's private. Science thrives on public, verifiable data. If two scientists disagree about an experiment, they can repeat it. But with consciousness, the only data I have is my own. I have direct access to my own thoughts and feelings, and no one else does. How can we build a science of something that only one person can ever observe at a time? This is the deep challenge. There seems to be an explanatory gap between our physical description of the brain and our subjective experience. We can tell a complete story about neurons firing and neurotransmitters crossing synapses. And we can tell a complete story about our feelings of joy and sorrow, but there is a huge blank space in between. How do you get from one story to the other? It feels like trying to explain a symphony by only talking about the air pressure of the sound waves. You've described something true, but you've missed the music. Given this massive puzzle, people have come up with different ways to try and solve it or dissolve it. These approaches fall into a few main camps. First, there's materialism or physicalism. This is the view that most scientists hold, at least implicitly. It's the idea that everything is physical. The mind is what the brain does. There is nothing extra, no soul, no ghost in the machine. Consciousness is a physical process, just a very complicated one. But even within this camp, there are big disagreements about how to handle the hard problem. One aggressive approach is sometimes called illusionism. Thinkers like Daniel Dennett argue that the hard problem is a mistake. It's based on a misunderstanding. The idea of qualia, these magical, private, ineffable experiences, is a confusing concept. We think we have this rich inner movie, but it's really more like a rough draft that our brain constantly edits and revises. The feeling of consciousness is an illusion, a trick the brain plays on itself. It's not that we aren't conscious. It's that what we think consciousness is, this mysterious inner light, isn't real. The real task is to explain why we have this powerful illusion of a hard problem. For many people, this feels deeply unsatisfying. To say that the most real thing we know, our own experience, is an illusion seems to deny the very thing we are trying to explain. A more common materialist view is that consciousness is simply identical to certain brain processes. The feeling of pain just is a certain pattern of neural activity. They are the same thing, viewed from different perspectives. One is the first-person perspective, the other is the third-person perspective. It's like how water and 2O are two different ways of describing the same thing. One is our everyday experiential way of knowing it. The other is the scientific, chemical way. The problem is, This doesn't feel like a full explanation. With water and H2O, we can understand how the microscopic properties of H2O molecules give rise to the macroscopic properties of water, like liquidity and wetness. But we have no such story for the brain. Why is that particular brain state identical to the feeling of sadness and not the taste of vanilla? The identity itself seems like a brute, unexplained fact. It doesn't close the explanatory gap. It just states that the gap isn't real. Because materialism has these difficulties, some people turn to dualism. This is the old idea most famously from René Descartes, that the mind and the body are two fundamentally different kinds of things. There is physical stuff, like brains and chairs, and there is mental stuff, like souls or consciousness. Our brain is the physical machine, and our mind or soul is the non-physical thing that experiences the world and drives the machine. This view has a strong intuitive appeal. It takes our inner experience seriously. And it says, yes, your feeling of red is a real non-physical thing, but it has a massive problem, which has plagued it for centuries, the interaction problem. If the mind is non-physical, how does it interact with the physical brain? How does a non-physical decision, like I want to raise my hand, cause physical neurons to fire and muscles to contract? And how does a physical event like stubbing your toe, because as a non-physical feeling of pain in your mind, it seems to require a violation of the laws of physics, which state that every physical event has a physical cause. Our dualism introduces a ghost into the machine, but it can't explain how the ghost pulls the levers. A more modern and subtle version of this is called property dualism. This is the view held by David Chalmers, the man who framed the hard problem. It says there is only one kind of stuff in the universe, physical stuff, but this stuff can have two different kinds of properties, physical properties like mass and charge, and mental properties like subjective experience. When you arrange physical matter in a very complex way, like in a brain, these new non-physical properties of consciousness just emerge. This avoids the problem of a separate soul, but it still leaves us with a deep mystery. It suggests that consciousness is a fundamental feature of the universe, like electromagnetism or gravity, that just appears under certain conditions. But it doesn't explain how or why. It simply accepts the hard problem as a basic fact of nature that we can't break down any further. For a scientist, this is often unsatisfying. It feels like giving up on finding a real explanation. This leads to an even more radical and ancient idea that has seen a recent comeback: panpsychism. And panpsychism is the idea that consciousness is not something special that happens only in brains. It's a fundamental property of matter itself. Everything in the universe, from an electron to a rock to a star, has some tiny primitive element of consciousness. This sounds strange. It does not mean that rocks are thinking deep thoughts or that electrons feel anxious. It means that the basic building blocks of reality have some incredibly simple, rudimentary form of inner experience, or proto-consciousness. In most arrangements, like in a rock, these tiny bits of consciousness don't add up to anything interesting. But in a complex, highly organized system like a brain, these tiny bits of experience combine to form the rich, unified consciousness that we know. The appeal of panpsychism is that it solves the hard problem by dissolving it. Consciousness doesn't magically pop into existence out of non-conscious matter. It was there all along. The brain doesn't create consciousness, it amplifies it and structures it. This avoids the sudden, magical leap from non-feeling stuff to feeling stuff. But panpsychism has its own version of the hard problem, called the combination problem. How do billions of tiny, simple bits of consciousness in your neurons combine to create your single, unified experience of being you? It's not at all obvious how you would add up tiny experiences to get one big one. If you put a bunch of people in a room, you don't get a new, bigger room consciousness. You just get a bunch of individual people. So how does the brain do it? This is just as puzzling as the original hard problem. So while the philosophers debate what are the scientists doing, they are mostly working on the easy problems, but with an eye on the hard one. The main approach is to search for the neural correlates of consciousness, or the NCCs. The goal is to find the specific brain activity that is the minimal and sufficient condition for any given conscious experience. For example, what is happening in your brain right now that corresponds to your experience of seeing the screen? If we could find that exact pattern and show that whenever that pattern occurs, you have the experience, and whenever it's absent, you don't, we would have found the NCC for that experience. This is incredibly difficult work involving brain imaging, studies of patients with brain damage, and clever psychological experiments. And we are making progress. We have some ideas about which parts of the brain and which types of neural activity seem to be crucial for conscious awareness. For instance, it seems to involve widespread, synchronized firing across different regions of the brain, particularly in the cortex at the back. Some scientific theories try to go a bit further. The global workspace theory suggests that consciousness is like a brightly lit stage in the theater of the mind. Lots of unconscious processing is happening in the dark backstage. But when some piece of information is important enough, it gets broadcast to this global workspace, where it becomes available to all the other systems in the brain. That broadcasting is what we experience as consciousness. Another theory called integrated information theory, or IIT, tries to define consciousness mathematically. It says that consciousness is a measure of a system's ability to integrate information. A system is conscious to the degree that it is a unified whole that is different from its parts. The theory even proposes a mathematical value called phi that you could, in principle, calculate for any system to determine how conscious it is. A brain would have a very high phi. A rock would have a phi of nearly 0. An interesting consequence of this theory is that it is a form of panpsychism. Even a simple particle could have a tiny non-zero amount of phi. But here is the crucial point. Even if we succeed beyond our wildest dreams, even if we find the exact NCC for every possible experience, and even if we have a perfect mathematical theory like IIT, many would argue we still wouldn't have solved the hard problem. We would have a perfect correlation, but not an explanation. We would have a complete story of what in the brain goes along with consciousness. But we would still be left with the question, why? Why does that specific pattern of integrated information feel like anything at all? Why does it feel like the taste of chocolate? We would have a perfect map, but the map is not the territory. And so we are left with the mystery. The hard problem of consciousness is not just another scientific puzzle to be solved. It bumps up against the very limits of what science, as we currently practice it, can do. It forces us to question our most basic assumptions about the world. Is the world purely physical, or is there something more? Is our inner life just a clever trick of a biological computer, or is it a fundamental feature of the cosmos? The truth is, nobody knows. There is no consensus. There are just smart people thinking hard and disagreeing. And maybe that's okay. The problem of consciousness is a reminder of our place in the universe. We are these incredibly complex beings who have woken up in the middle of a vast, mysterious reality. And the most profound mystery of all is the fact that we can wake up at all. The fact that there is an experience of being you, right here, right now, reading these words. That is the miracle, and that is a hard problem.